One of the best ways to maximize your range of values in your drawing is to avoid drawing on blank white paper. If you're a fan of Paul Prud'hon and many other artists throughout art history, as well as contemporary realists, you will notice that the majority of those artists do not draw on blank white paper. Now, this paper here that I'm using is a Strathmore 300 medium tooth drawing paper. It's sort of a generalist paper for drawing. My preferred medium in drawing is a combination of vine, willow, and compressed charcoal. Now, obviously, this paper is not tinted or toned, and you can purchase those types of papers if you're willing to budget for them, but there's really no need. I like this paper because it has a relatively good durability and it can take many different types of marks and it holds up under rigorous erasing over the entire span of creating a very finished and polished drawing. It's just a good general paper all around and it's relatively priced pretty decently. Now you can see that I've taken a 1-inch wide roll of blue painter's tape and I'm taking a lot of care to place down a perimeter border of the tape. And this is really important. If you rush this step, the border that this creates in your finished product will look very haphazard. And it will be immediately clear to a viewer that not a lot of care was taken because it won't be square. And once I placed 2 of the borders, I went ahead and I flipped this page because there's no reason not to in a way that is the easiest to work with. As you can see, there's nothing magical about what I'm doing here. I'm just putting down this border and making sure that it's straight as possible. And the beauty about this tape is that if I make a mistake while I'm doing this, it comes off relatively easy and the paper is tough enough to allow that to be replaced. Now, obviously, the most important edge of this border is the interior edge, and I make sure that it's completely bonded to the paper by using my fingernail. And I'm very thorough in this. We don't want any bleed through once we tone the page. So now that we're ready to go, I went ahead and I grabbed some clamps from the top of my easel. And there's nothing special about these. You can find these at any home hardware store, Lowe's, Home Depot, your neighborhood hardware store. I've been using these for years. They're great. So once the paper is secured to my drawing board, I'm ready to start toning. And I make sure that there's no bubbles in the tape and that the clamps aren't actually crimping the tape in the corners. So here I'm just reviewing my options and I make sure to pick up vine charcoal. I don't want willow because that's too scratchy. And I just have at it. There's really no rhyme or reason when it comes to throwing down the tone. Other than really it should be more or less uniform. And the vine charcoal is just so soft and such a pleasure to work with that it's like finger painting. It's really quite satisfying. And you'll notice that I don't drag the edge of the vine charcoal over the tape. And I'll explain why in just a second. And you'll see how quickly that medium just pours onto the page. So here I have my ghetto chamois. I do have high-end chamois, but this is actually just an old dress sock. And there's really a lot of opportunity to be innovative, I guess, or inventive when trying to save money in art materials. One of the things that I can't stand about being an artist is just the markup on some of these things is just so outrageous. So I found that this dress sock had a nice texture and laid down, consistently, um, a value that I really just kind of enjoyed. And now I'm just smoothing out the marks that came directly off the stick of vine charcoal. And I'm going back and forth in a pattern. I start off with doing sort of an S pattern, and then I went diagonally and then perpendicular to that diagonal. And this just makes sure that all of the surface texture of the paper, or the pores of the paper, get filled evenly. So here you can see I'm applying the charcoal in the very small space between the tape and where I wasn't brave enough to overlay in the initial tone. We want to make sure that when we apply the charcoal right next to the tape is that we do not apply it parallel to the tape. This will cause the tape to lift off the paper. You'll notice that I'm applying it from left to right on this vertical left side. And down on the bottom, I'm going from bottom up. I don't want to go left to right if the tape is left to right. This will make more sense once I go ahead and finish the rest. And you notice I actually never touch the tape when I work vertically on the vertical side of the tape. I'm very careful not to touch it. That backfill needs to run perpendicular. Right to left, right to left again. Now bottom up. We don't want to disturb that seal. So I take my chamois sock once again, and I start pushing the charcoal from the center area near the tape border into the little gap left. So I'm pushing it up against the tape. Here it's just counterclockwise. And I switch to a clockwise motion for the right side. This allows that tiny little white space to get nice and toned. You can see there's a little bit of excess coming off of the chamois. That's not a big deal. We'll be able to blend that completely uniform. So as I'm applying this and I'm getting to a point that I feel it is getting finished, the pressure that I'm applying with the chamois is progressively lighter. The harder I press with a saturated chamois, the more visible marks it will make. And that's not what I want. I want a tone that is even. And just off camera, there was a small area that was just a little too light for me. This is typically in the corners. The more uniform your tone, the stronger and crisper the final white border will be when your drawing is completely finished. And whenever you finish a drawing, of course, you would spray it with adhesive, or what I like to call a fixative. That way your drawing, after all that hard work, it can't smudge. And then the final step would be to pull the tape off, which I will show you in just a second. So my hands are really dirty at this point. So I'm just simply going to go off camera for just a second and I will wash my hands. So there we go. Hands are nice and clean. and they're very dry. So here I would do the entire drawing, I would finish it, I would spray it, and here's time to reveal the white border. I will be very, very delicate in this process. So far, so good. Let's see how I did on the bottom border. You notice I used my nail rather than my finger. I don't want to put a dirty fingerprint on that white border. The sounds are just so cool. So the only piece of tape that's left runs left to right along the top. Take it off. At this point, I need to be very careful not to drop or smudge or even breathe too hard on the tone. In a finished drawing, your drawing would be sealed and you could use, you could be a little more aggressive in the process, but I like to keep things nice and gentle. And I always pull away from the page parallel to the length of the side that I'm using. I would never pull toward the toned area of the finished drawing. Always want to pull away from the work. So there's a couple little tiny spots that I notice. It may or may not be visible in the camera. The tape was a little dirty or my hands weren't as clean as I thought. And so I just need to select my kneaded eraser, make sure it's nice and clean. And I just simply remove those small, barely visible areas of charcoal dust that somehow got through. Just a tiny, tiny little mark. So, looks good, nice and even. Here's a wide shot. We have a perfect white border on a toned page.